And over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Larissa. Thanks for the introduction. And as you said, today we talk about the business process principle. And to kick it off, let us remind ourselves on what Clean Core is all about. I trust that everyone is aware of it, but some of you who might be new to the topic, we would like to get started with the one and only slide that we have where we define what is Clean Core, and you can see it on the slide. It's a set of guiding principles. And in the second half of the slide, to say the principle focuses on building resilient business process and extensions, and that's supported by integration, efficient operations, and the right data quality. So basically, we summarize the 5, what we call now guiding principles of Clean Core, but you can also see that the extensibility that Lukas was talking last week about and the business process have an important role there, the leading them principles in the Clean Core context. And also this slide should be familiar with you, where we depict on each of the 5 Clean Core principles that define the Clean Core topic. And you can see what is basically the theme, the ambition. We want to ensure that you in your organizations can keep the competitiveness in the sense that you can deviate from SAP standard as it comes out of a box, out of a delivery basically to you. But at the same time, we want to try together with you reduce complexity so that you don't, and I think we were last week talking about this one when Lukas gave an example, not build golden balconies to a standard solution if they do not really have a tangible business value and therefore are really important for you to ensure that you can keep your competitiveness or can create a competitive advantage by deviating from standard. So that's what we have in mind when we talk about business processes. So as you can see, we're not ruling out any extensions. There sometimes have been, I think, myths or misunderstandings on what Clean Core is. Something like you're not allowed to deviate, you only use standard. No, that's not the aim. We understand that it's a great value that we can adjust and adapt our SAP S/4HANA solution. But at the same time, there comes also liability with making extensions, and we want to keep this under control, that it is a good cost to value balance at the end of the day. Now, let's double click on what is the clean business process. I gave you the overview, reminded ourselves that we have those 5 guiding principles, and that, as you could see, the business process sits right on top of these 5 dimensions because that's where it starts. Now, the question is, what is a clean business process? And the clean business process we describe, as I just said, as a business process that remains your competitiveness as an organization, but it reduces complexity by staying as close to SAP standard as possible. And that when you do enhancements, and there are obviously by nature different type of enhancements in the sense of like adopting SAP standard by creating additional configuration, but also adopting SAP standard by making developments, that you have a clear razor-shaped focus on whether this is differentiating you as an organization and whether this enhancement's gonna bring really measurable value. So that is the overall aim that we have, and that's here described in this one sentence about what is a clean business process. And when we look at today's, let me say, organizations, implementations, and that I've experienced myself, then we basically can see that a lot of these systems, you can see it in this process segmentation visualization on the right-hand side, the level of standard processes, where really SAP standard as it was once delivered, or where we basically use standard enhancements or configurations like an S-Pro and the implementation guide, for example, creating a new payment term, creating a new sales order type variant, that are rather low. There's a lot of like enhancements being done. I would also say, admittedly, rightfully, over the last decades, when certain functionality and capabilities were not available, when the user interface lacked consumability, when it was required to create a ZGUIs in order to collect 2 or 3 standard transactions into a more role-based view. All of that basically created legacy, and therefore, when you look at today's systems, there's a lot of enhancements being made. And even on top of that, there is own custom, I would say, applications being built on an S/4HANA stack. In the sense, for example, that I've seen customers who said, I have built my own MRP run, my own material requirements planning run, because the one from SAP was not really good. It did not run that well. That was basically done 20 years ago, and we completely are decoupled from SAP standard. And the layer of innovations, or where we really do innovations in the processes, that's rather low. And he's just probably he visualized on that slide, or did visualize it to make sure that it could put the word innovation in it, because very often the statement from customers that I had been working was, we just do once in a while when we have to do it, and a release upgrade, more from a security point of view, or that we are not able to implement OSS nodes anymore, but not with like saying, hey, there's a new release on the market. Like in our case now, we would talk about 2025, S/4HANA 2025, 10 years of SAP S/4HANA. And we understand that there are capabilities, for example, AI-based capabilities, but also other capabilities that would help us to improve our processes. But that is not part of the discussion, or very often not part of the discussion. Why? Because once I've started to deviate entirely from SAP standard, also the new innovations that we're going to bring into the product do not any value, or they cannot be consumed because the entire process is being run and not in standard anymore. It's a little bit, there's shades of gray, I would say, in this, and that should illustrate the point here that in the target state, moving away from the current state, the goal is with some more governance, with some more challenging with enhancements, advantage to business processes, the level of standard process increases, the enhanced process decreases, and most importantly, the level of innovation in the processes, the consumption of innovation in the standard product capabilities basically gets bigger. That's the goal. And you can see also on the left-hand side, there are quite, I would say, obvious benefits and values. Some of them you could arguably quantify, but some of a qualitative nature, such as the reduction of total cost of ownerships. In my experience when working with customers, I had occasions where processes were enhanced, and the extensions that were built in the extensibility dimension were called like the person who requested the extension, like the Z. Müller month-end closing report that was developed for the chief financial controller. Mr. Müller left the company meanwhile. It's not really clear why this report is needed, but it's still hanging around. And the developer who developed it will go into a pension very soon. So someone is saying, I don't understand what has been developed. The person who requested it has left the company, the person who's maintaining it. And now what do I do with that? I mean, you get, again, hopefully the point that the closer you can be with standard, the better it is from that point of view. Again, repeat, it's not about having no enhancements, but it's to doing them in the smart way and to balance the cost and the value side. Now, the question is how to achieve a clean business process. What must be in place to ensure that an organization, either in a situation of I'm a net new customer of SAP coming from a non-SAP solution doing a new implementation, and I have customers who basically I support in this kind of transformation journey, but also as a customer who have been using SAP for many, many years, and now maybe have recently moved to SAP S/4HANA or to RISE. And now I ask myself, okay, how do I achieve a clean business process? The journeys are different. There's a get clean journey, so getting cleaner over time. There's a stay clean journey, preventing that the business process is getting unclean. But there are 4 pillars that are essential in order to achieve a clean business process. I mean, first of all, we firmly believe that it's required to have an end-to-end tool chain. I mean, you probably noticed that SAP has in the last years doubled down on also acquisition and investments to build a tool chain. And the idea of the tool chain is basically to lay the foundation in the sense of connecting the enterprise architecture view, the business process view, and the application lifecycle management view. So those 3 views are essential when it comes to understanding, do I need to deviate from standard? Is there maybe a business capability where I on purpose decided that that is a differentiating one? Do I know an inventory of software solutions available in my organization, so that before I deviate and make an enhancement, because it's so easy to do and ask my developer to do another thing in the S/4HANA system, well, there's another dedicated application in the organization to fulfill such a business requirement. For that, you need to have an enterprise architecture. You need to know your business capabilities. You need to know your applications. You need to know the current state and the target state if you're going to involve this landscape. And you also need to have a clear roles and responsibility. Who owns these business capabilities? Who owns these applications? and you need to set yourself governance and guidelines. So if you implement something, who needs to be contacted, what are the key stakeholders that need to be involved in this process. The main point here in the conversation that I see with customers is that they have elements of that enterprise architecture, business process management, application management practices available. So that's definitely not a situation where a customer has nothing in place, but very often they are decoupled, they're not integrated, and they are not working as a one unit. As I said, in the second pillar, define business capabilities. To have the, let me say, the tooling side of the house, the enterprise architecture management is only lays the foundation for building a robust business capability map, an application architecture, and a transformation roadmap. Once that is done, and now we come more to the business process point of view, we need to know our processes. We need to define them. We need to know what are our end-to-end processes, what are our modular processes, and how they ideally link to the business capabilities and to the value drivers. And the pace layering that you might know, where you basically cluster and classify business capabilities, that's something that you could also apply, or that you propose to apply on the business processes. To saying, hey, this is a process like sending an invoice. This is a non-differentiating process. I don't create a competitive advantage if my invoice looks different than the invoice of my competitor or of anyone else. But there might be other processes where I'm saying, hey, this is an innovating layer. This is a process or sits in an innovating layer where I'm saying, if I do, for example, a returns handling, as someone ships something back to me, or a complaint, that I'm doing something different and better than others using maybe modern technology. Again, we can say AI, but we can think about the user interface, think about everything. We are saying overall this justifies investment. And then it's the approach, the methodology, adopt a fit to standard approach for the to-be process design and realization. So basically taking the standard as the basis and understand, do my business requirements fit to the standard? Carefully tracking the business requirements. So what are the requirements over and above what SAP standard can do? Looking into the value of these business requirements, understanding also whether they are, for example, adhere to the clean core principles of extensibility integration. So when I figured out that I need to enhance SAP standard and I create a business requirement, but during the technical realization downstream, handle in an application lifecycle management solutions like SAP Cloud ALM, when I at that point identify that I need 5 modifications, then I should ask myself, is it worth doing these 5 modifications? And I think Lukas said it last week. There will be cases where it will be required because it's simply a legal requirement. It's a super important business requirement. And we as SAP have not given you an API to enhance the system or haven't done your configuration. But when you do that, you should make a cautious and careful decision about it and have control about that. Those are the 4 pillars that we see that in whatever kind of like maturity level, I almost want to say, you need to have, you need to take into account, you need to build up, you need to shape in your organization in order to keep a process as clean as possible. And what we've basically done, we've said we come here to from the house side, we come, how do we execute it? How we recommend that you in an organization can execute such an approach. And the first thing is we have put something, you can see it on the slide, which is called governance and maturity. So we acknowledge that every customer is different. Every customer has invested or not invested in all of these aspects. And to understand what is now recommended to do and what is recommendable to do is we have created what's called governance maturity assessment. And the governance maturity assessment looks into different, we call it practices, like enterprise architecture management, application lifecycle management, business process management, application lifecycle management, but also very obvious at the process deviation management, understanding how well do you handle process deviations. That is understanding what needs to be done in order to keep a process clean in an organization. What are the actions? What are the to-dos that you want to fulfill in order to keep your processes clean? At the same time, like Lukas was discussing last week on extensibility, we also defined KPIs. And around, in this particular case, about the process standardization. So how do you measure whether your processes are clean, whether your processes stick to SAP standard? So both of these sides we have developed. And they are part of what we call the Clean Core Measurement Framework. So the Clean Core Measurement Framework, as you might have now already understood on the previous slide, consists of 2 parts. left side is the governance maturity. This is about giving you recommendations about the tools, the governance structures like an SSP, for example, and also the expertise that you need to build up in your organization in order to make sure that the system gets clean and both stays clean across all of the 5 clean core principles. And on the other side, we have the KPIs. And the KPIs, in this particular case, is a process standardization. Look at the adherence. How much do you adhere to your organization to a particular KPI? I want to be 80% or 90% SAP standard. How well are you performing against this one? And they can be either collected automatically out of the system or with the help of the tools of the integrated tool chain. In this particular case, for example, about Signavio and SAP Cloud ALM in the process context space can be determined. And you can see that the governance maturity is something that we will, over the next couple of weeks, actually put into the RISE with SAP methodology in the Clean Core Quality Gates. If you've already maybe worked with the Clean Core Quality Gates, you understand that they are part of the RISE with SAP methodology introduced last year. So this content that you will see in the next couple of minutes will, apart from that, it's already available, and we can have share that with you via standard SAP slide decks. It will be also become part of our official framework, the RISE with SAP methodology, where we can execute it as Q gates in SAP Cloud ALM as a quality gate app, as it's called there in the system. And the KPIs in process standardization, they are not yet part of the RISE with SAP methodology dashboard, to already say that, but they are planned for next year to become part. So there's a roadmap where step after step, we in the different clean core principles add additional KPIs to the RISE with SAP methodology framework. So as you can see, we're not just having an idea about clean core, but we're also trying to give you something in your hands that you're able to execute it. And the way you can execute it is the clean core measurement framework with the governance maturity and the KPIs. Now let us look into both sides. That is the goal of today's session, that we'll look into that. I familiarize with you. I want to say it up front. I will not go through every single of the practices and questions, otherwise it becomes to be very tedious. The goal is that I outline, I explain how the intention is of the governance maturity side and of the KPIs, so that you're familiar and then yourself can in the next steps basically have a look at the material, understand, apply it, and basically always contact us if you need help with regard to the execution. So let us look at governance maturity for the processes. And as you've seen on the previous slide, on the house slide, we have what we call different practices. So we're saying in order to achieve a clean core business process, there are certain practices we want to assess that an organization has to be built up. And the first one is the maturity of the enterprise architecture management. So as it says on the Y level, the clean core process dimension recommends to set up an end-to-end tool chain. So we're not saying you must have it, but for most organizations, it's required to have such a tool chain in place, and one that connects the enterprise architecture with the business process management and the application lifecycle management. You see here basically the same sentence on all of the Y levels, because the idea is that all of them are being connected with each other, as I said previously. And we ask in the what, and this is basically already the spoiler on what questions we're going to ask when we assess the maturity. We ask, have you set up an own enterprise architecture practice? Is it supported by tools? Do you have a target architecture definition? So can you say in your organization, these are the business capabilities, there's a business capability map. We at SAP have a reference business architecture, which we always recommend if you have not an architecture and the capability map in place, that you take as a foundation and then enrich. So do you have such a target architecture definition? Do you have what we call LeanIX fact sheets, like for capabilities for applications? Do you have set up your transformation? Do you know in which increments you're going to move to this target state? And then at the end of the day, do you integrate? So do you link your business capabilities with your processes? Can you have a view? Okay, these are my capabilities, these are my associated processes, and then at the end of the day, have a holistic view. Then we have the business process management, the maturity of the business process management. So do you have business process management established? Do you have a definition of functional and end-to-end processes in your organization? Are you able to measure your performance of your individual processes by key performance indicators? These are questions that we're going to ask in here. And then finally, the maturity of your application lifecycle management. So as I said, when you think of having a business requirement captured, for example, in the fit to standard workshop, and then that business requirement is basically sitting loose and the people who will configure the system are not aware which was the requirement, that's obviously not good. The ideal way is that the technical requirements are captured within an ALM tool. We say it here on purpose, product neutral. We don't mention the names of our products. I just infuse them to get a little bit more colorful. But the technical requirement would be the requirements object in Cloud ALM, which you would synchronize with your business requirements in Signavio, and thereby also have a linkage to the business process and a traceability, understanding who has actually requested this change. And then you connect it to your further downstream processes, understanding also how you would realize such a requirement. You could make a loop back in the governance structure saying, hey, during further realization of this business requirement, we detected that we need, when it comes to realization, we need an enormous amount of mandates. And are we really sure we want to do this development? What is the value? I would say it's fair to say in a lot of the conversation that I have with customers, that is something that is in place, partially in place, maybe not completely rolled out. But when we talk about Clean Core, we cover a lot of points and topics in each of these Clean Core principles that are like a good practice for many, many years, but we just to make it a little bit more explicit and a little bit more, yeah, I would say almost forceful to follow them in times where change is happening so fast. So those are the first of the three practices. And then there's the practice of the process deviation management, where I already said it's quite an important one. So this is all about really understanding how you handle as an organization process deviations. Do you have a standardized way of recording them that is visible for everybody in the organization? Do you have a clear justification? Do you look into the value? Do you do an impact analysis? What would be the case if you don't do that requirement? Do you have what we call business and architectural governance through a solution standardization board? So is there an organization, an entity within your company that looks at these changes and makes a decision whether to do or not to do them? Do you look at extensibility, integration, and data impact when it comes to that one? So as I said, do you look at, hey, what is the impact of this business requirement with regard to my Clean Core? Can I do the extensibility in a perfect way where I have an API available? That's a different occasion than if I basically catch 5 business modifications. Do you look into a strategic alignment with SAP standard and the roadmap? So is there maybe something on the roadmap, or is there an option to also minimize the impact by doing some deviation, but making it not as big and having a good compromise again between cost and value? Then at the end of the day, we talk about change. So change in the sense that someone has an idea how a process should be, and the process is not in SAP the way that someone, the organization, the business process owners, the business users think about. And now the question is, if you think about the new implementation project, for example, how do you handle change management and user enablement? Is it something that is more like at an ad hoc level, where everyone does it their own way, or do you do it in a structured manner? Do you have change agent, do you have change buddies, etc.? And also, is the change management integrated with regard to the processes, so that you understand if I, sort of, for example, go back to standard in a certain process, that I know what other processes are impacted, and then I do a very dedicated change management to the roles that are impacted by that particular change. So in our point of view, that is important if you want to stay clean, because you will, at the end of the day, need to make decisions that do not make every enhancements, and that in particular, amongst other things, will require change management and user enablement, that you move away from a lot of enhancements to less enhancements to fulfill such a journey. And then there's the organizational transformation readiness. So all of these tools that were basically sitting behind the practice of EAM, BPM, and ALM at the end of the day are only as good as you've clearly defined roles. If you have a transformation office or a similar organization that basically holds everything together. So those are the 6 practices that we recommend to look at. And none of that is as such, also want to say, mandatory. It's a recommendation. It's our proposal to look at that. And typically the experience of the past month, basically this since April, when we wrote this out officially, but we did customer validation prior to that. That at that moment, when you do the double click on each of these practices, looking to maturity, it becomes even much clearer than it was before what is actually meant by clean core, what is meant by a business process. Because before you saw maybe a slide, you understood there's certain elements like an end-to-end tool chain, capabilities, certain facets. Yeah, it became kind of clear. But if you look into what we are asking now, in one example on the next slide, the next slides, I have to say, typically this is the moment where a very good conversation starts within the different colleagues in the IT and the business teams that are involved in the topic. Before we look at one example in process deviation management, what we basically want to also achieve with this clean core measurement framework, we want to calculate a score, because what you can't measure, you can't improve, you know the saying. And we have basically a very simple way of doing this with what we call a current score and a target score. And it's from 0 to 5. And with now not fully explaining you what 0 and 5 means, you could get like 0 is not good and 5 is best in class. There's no one else in the world that can be better. And I always say, like it's in school, it's probably not desirable to have always in Germany, we say Schule de one, so best in class in all of the subjects, right? It's okay sometimes to have a 2. And the same applies here. It might be a case where someone says process deviation management is absolutely essential from us from now on into the future because we want to be in the public cloud in 2032. That's our goal. And this is a custom example. And if I have such a target, I won't say ambitious target even, but if I have the target, well, in process deviation management, I need to have much more control and have much stricter rules. In other cases, for example, about change management, if I'm an organization that, for example, is not worldwide spread, who has a headquarter and a few facilities around Germany, I might say, hey, change management I can do, but I don't need a bombastic tool of e-learning. So what we're going to say is you need to think about where I am today. What is my current score? Reflect on that and set a target score. And the target score does not always need to be 5. And it's even not whether your current score is now 2 and the target score is 5. It's what is the gap between the current and target, because that determines where you think it's worthwhile taking actions. Actions that also, not just exist, but also that they are justifiable because, again, they create value and the costs to them are to the value are something that you think you can argue. So it's kind of like a motivation to saying, hey, think about if you want to have a clean core, whatever that was at the beginning, and if you look into now the clean core principle of the business processes, and if you look into these 6 practices, and if you ask yourself, you will see it in the next slide, a few very, I would say, fairly simple questions, what are the actions that you as an organization can take? You can also see that we say there's an importance for the overall rating. We said probably change management organization is slightly less important than the other practices. So this is for the weighting. Before I show you one of the examples in process deviation management, one final comment. We see that customers, when they're within an S/4HANA transformation, the topic of clean core, for example, matters more or less. With customers, we as SAPs call it lift and shift. They basically move from their current infrastructure to an SAP infrastructure and literally take an S/4HANA stack, for example, 1909 as an example, and move it into our RISE with SAP environment. So if this is being done, you will probably say my key focus is I want to complete this exercise as fast as possible for dual maintenance, for interfaces, for business risk and disruption. It's nothing you would say, now all of a sudden I try to go back to standard. But there's another case where I might have 3 or 4 ERP systems from SAP over many, many years grown. And I understand this regional split that I may have designed, again, like 15, 20 years ago is no longer really meaningful. And I want to come back to a single instance, and I do a sort of like new implementation and trying to, over time, consolidate my landscape. If I do that, clean core and, for example, the business process management and process deviation management has a much higher, a complete, entirely different importance. So therefore, we say when you assess your maturity, do it also in the context of where you are in your transformation journey. And don't assess just everything you could do for having it assessed, but rather pick 1 or 2 of the clean core principles and some of the practices, go through them, derive the actions, see what actions you're going to take to improve, and then going to revisit and yes, take another set of practices or of the clean core principles and further work along your way. That is something, yeah, you would say in architecture language tailoring, you need to tailor it. It's a circle, yeah, and you should circle a couple of times around it, probably over multiple years, to be honest, in order to be successful on this one. Now, last one, as I promised here on the clean core maturity framework on the governance maturity side is, how does an example look like? And here you can see we look at process deviation management. I said it a couple of times already, quite an important aspect when it comes to keep the core clean. And we have what we're going to call evaluation criteria. You could call it also questions or checklists. And we basically ask simple things. Do you have a standardized way to record process deviations by DELA requirements? Describing who needs it, what is needed, and why is it needed. So do you have that? Do you have it maybe using Signavio? Do you have it maybe Cloud ALM? Do you have maybe it in Jira? Do you have it in Azure DevOps? But do you have it? Next one, do you perform an impact analysis to minimize deviations? So do you think, okay, could I minimize the change, yeah, by doing a little bit of less enhancement and still somehow being okay? I'm not going to go through all the questions, but I think you get the idea. Last one, do you document business justifications? And these are examples that we have seen from customers that we basically took into this approach for marketing differentiating legal and industry compliance. So is there really a reason they're one saying, hey, there's a legal reason, I need this field, I need this check, I need this workflow, I need this 4I principle, I need to make an enhancement, there's no other way around it. So these are the things that we're going to ask, and I can say it's probably a little bit hard for you to grasp because you only see one example. It takes on average something like 1.5 hours if you would go through all of these practices. Because as I said, it's not in the first round when you go through this with customers, when I do that with my customers, that we want to be academic correct. It's a 3.5.4 and the target score is a 4.7. It's more to lead a conversation, to drive a conversation. And at the end of the day, across all of the practices, and maybe across multiple the clean core principles, like Lukas and I did an exercise last week where we run both assessments in parallel because there were two different teams, and then we came at the end together. We showed the results from the process to the extensibility side and from the extensibility side to the process side. That you can see, okay, where are the, let me say, the highlights, where's the biggest difference between the current and target score. And then in the next round, you might look only at these practices, double down and saying, okay, why did we score like that? Was there maybe a misunderstanding? Were different people in the room thinking differently about the current score? So you circle a couple of times around, and at the end of the day, you come to the conclusion, what are the actions that you want to now take forward? Second side, on this clean core measurement framework, right-hand side is about the KPIs. So what are the KPIs that we suggest in order to measure the clean core? And there are basically 4 KPIs that we have in this first version that we now released a few weeks ago, put into the scope of the clean core business processes. So the first one basically says the processes fit to standard alignment. So the idea behind this KPI, and there are slides detailing this, but for the sake of this presentation, I just will stay on this slide. But you have this as the handout, and you can go through that. The process fit to standard alignment basically says how many processes fit to standard. So assume you would have an SAP system, vanilla, with SAP best practices being implemented with a certain configuration, and you would count on how many of those processes, like J54, for example, do I record any deviation or record no deviation? So I always say this is like going to SAP S/4HANA public cloud. Yeah? So going to like a software as a solution where you have a system where the idea is that you really can run your processes, but still you can make some enhancements. And the higher the percentage level is here on this one, the less overall deviations you have recorded. Then there's a process fit to standard alignment. So you look at the next level, you look at the processes that have gaps being recorded, and you count them. So how many of the systems, how many of the processes that I have looked into, or which are part of my scope, on how many I have basically gaps recorded. And for that, we have a classification, what is the fit and what is the gap, which comes on the next slide. And then the next level is that you look at how many of these gaps I only can fulfill when I do some sort of like enhancement, but where do I violate clean core principles and where not violate clean core principle? That's the next one. And there's a final one where we look at simplification items and capability scope, because we're saying a clean core system ensures that there is no investment being done, ideally, into compatibility scope, into simplification items, because this will be sunk investment. So those are the four KPIs, and essential to this, and this is why I put it in, is that we have already in December last year released the Clean Core Business Processes white paper. And this white paper includes a classification. And this is a classification that we also now leverage in these KPIs. So we're basically saying, hey, whenever we create a requirement, it's called a clean core requirement, or we can call it a business requirement. It's either a fit or it's a gap. So let me give you an example. It's a fit FEC. It's an extended configuration. So it's an additional setting, which is totally normal in all of the projects I've ever done with customers. So you set up additional organizational structures, set up additional company codes, and so forth on. But there are also GECs. So you extend the configuration that are not aligned to standard by, for example, making, as you see in the example side, doing further development. So you've been extending the configuration with available solution capabilities so that you clearly extend it, but you extend it to a case where it's not really good anymore. So while it might be good to have a few more payment terms, which we would say is FEC, because there may be 2 in standard and you add another 3 because you're saying that's not good. But we see many customers, they don't have 5 payment terms, but they have 500, or let us say 150 realistically. But out of the 150, 50 have never been used, 50 have been used 1 time, and then there's only 20 who've ever been used. So we're saying they're basically going over the top, and that's what we want to prevent here in this one. And then there's, for example, also the GEP, where we do deviations by the means of extensibility. So those are the different classifications in the fit and gap node that we'll foresee, that we basically take as the basis for doing the calculation. So yeah, let me sum it up. What we just talked about, we talked about the business process clean core principle. We looked into how it's being defined. We looked into the clean core measurement framework as a vehicle to achieve this clean core business process principle with both the governance maturity and on the other side with the KPIs. And with that, we have, I can see, plenty of time for questions. And I would ask Lukas or Larissa while I'm opening up the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I left you one that is pretty nice. Because that's how should customers buy in return on investment from clean core assessment of BPM, EAM, ALM? How can you show the value proposition to C-suite executives, TCO versus ROI? There was a question on the tool chain before, how tools can support there, that we already covered, but I think that's a nice one because it links directly to the integrated tool chain and the questions we have.
Okay, I just see the question in the Q&A. So how should customers buy in an ROI from clean core assessment of BPM? How can you show the value proposition? Okay, perfect. I can see the question. I mean, first of all, I really gave you a sneak overview on the KPI side of the clean core measurement framework. So we are right now working on deriving and I give you the name, a clean core value framework. Sorry to throw around names. Which is basically the next and I would say almost final step, which basically has a calculation of how one could calculate a quantifiable value on the basis of the KPIs. So our logic is, I hope, pretty straightforward. We're saying there are things an organization need to do in order to achieve cleanness in all of the 5 clean core principles. That is covered by the governance maturity assessment, understanding how well you are set up to protect your core or keep your core clean. Then there are KPIs who measure the adherence and can measure how clean you are. And those KPIs at the same time also basically are the foundation for a value calculation. So for example, say, if you would assume that today you on average have a number of process deviation because, and I give a simple example, because you have no control. And if you would have a governance and a tool chain in place that prevents such a high number of process deviation, what would be the return of investment in the sense of like, if you lower the number of process deviations, what does it mean to your total cost of ownership? What does it mean to development costs, to extensibility costs, to maintenance costs? Also think about, again, it's always specific to the customer situation in which such a calculation is performed. If you would arguably say one does a new implementation, and sometimes SAP projects, I would say, are not famous to be on time and on budget. And if you keep no control on the scope of the project, in the sense of like what are deviations I accept, that I basically start to invest, and which will typically make my project running longer. If I don't have such a control, my project will last longer, and there's also an impact on that one. So there's this, as I said, clean core value framework that will, I would say, in the next couple of weeks also will add to that one, which gives a calculation to make a quantifiable case on that one. That's the one answer I want to give. The other one is we have obviously an overlap. You do not only build a tool chain and invest into a tool chain because of clean core. You do it for many, many other reasons. Yeah, if you think about, and I now talk about an SAP employee about Linux, you have application virtualization. The customers that are doing enterprise architecture work, they very often detect how many software packages, lying around in an organization, that does more or less the same. So I would say you would not, or you should not, associate all the costs, if you come from the cost side, from the value side, and think about the costs, that is required to set this up only to the clean core, but only a certain proportion. I hope that gives a glimpse of an answer and also an outlook. There is something more coming, and hope that tapped already a little bit.
All right. There was one more question in the Q&A tool around white paper. I've put a link in the chat to this clean core extensibility white paper, but I think the wish was to include this link to the slides. So probably to Michael, maybe you can adjust your slide with this.
Definitely.
So there was also a process white paper shared from Lukas. So it's also in the chat. I can see one raised hand. Let me see if we can let Maurizio talk. Maurizio, can you try to speak up?
You're muted.
So there is one more raised hand from Arun. Let's see if Arun works.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, now we can hear Arun.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So really nice presentation on clean core. Look, I work with portfolio companies, and they always want to, move to the cloud or private cloud or public cloud, and they are not sure. So, and the question is, I think the clean core is a good, let's say, approach before moving there, because you clean the house before doing the big stuff. But really, I think what's the value, like how much savings, what's the TCO impact? I think you spoke on that, but maybe a little more timeline approach would be useful. So how long this clean core will take? What does it really add value from a TCO perspective? That would be super helpful. Like if a customer does not do a clean core and goes to RISE, or let's say a customer wants to go to public cloud due to carve out or in post-merge integration, would you still recommend a clean core approach before doing that? Thank you.
Try to, Lukas already unmute, put the camera on. It looks like you want to say something. I would say from you gave like quite a few examples, and I always struggle to give like the one answer, because in our reality it's very very different, right? And I try to give a few examples and make it clear by that. Lukas and I work with a customer, for example, who really says, I want to be in SAP S/4HANA public cloud. in 2030, but I have a system which is roughly 20, 25 years old. And while this customer already have a good governance, he has tons of enhancements being made because it simply was possible. Now, do you go from tons of enhancements that have been, classified with like tools like Lukas presented the last time to like 0, such a step? There's no way. So we basically said, I'm going to make myself on a journey. I understand where do I have these individual enhancements being made, to which business process they are linked. He's using Signavio, to which capabilities they are being linked. And then he put himself on a journey because he says, with me in my organization, I know at some point I want to be in SAP S/4HANA Public Cloud. So the customer says that, and that's not like SAP pushes someone somewhere, right? Which sometimes is a bit of in the market, I would say, a rumor, because we do not push something to the S/4HANA Public Cloud. But he says that's my ambition. With another customer where we're working, who says I consolidate. I'm an automotive company, and we have built a new template, but now we're rolling out the template. And if we roll out this template into all our regions and market units and replacing, I think, 6 or 7, can't remember, Lukas, how many it was, existing ERP systems, if I don't put the principles that we now call clean core business process and process deviation management in the tool chain, and I don't have like a link to my management saying, hey, dear management, we can do 2 things. We're either being nice to everyone in the market unit with the existing ERP system from SAP, and they get exactly what they have today, we do no change management, or we're being not so nice, in the sense of like, we will go back to a common company template, right? Those are the 2 options. But if you don't do that, the rollout will take much longer. And at the end of the day, we have one system where we basically have a lot of complexity in, because it reflects 6 or 7 existing systems. So I think to tell the story really credible, you need to have the context of the customer. That's what I'm saying is. At the same time, as I said, I think end of the year, early next year, we have a value measurement framework where we basically do a calculation where we're saying, hey, if you assume that, for example, on data volume, to take another example, you have done no data volume management, you haven't done archiving, and you would do archiving, what would be the cost impact? So we will give a guardrail, a template for calculation, but I'm personally under the opinion that it's much more powerful to explain the story in the context of the specific customer situation. And finally, two comments, and sorry to be so elaborate on it. It is that when we have a conversation with customers, Lukas and myself as an EA, it's also, as I said, in between, it's not that the customer hasn't done any clean core. We now call it clean core since a few years. We have put a couple of principles, of dimensions that we coded in. A lot of that, I would say, someone would have said, hey, we have done this like 10 or 20 years ago before he even said it's called clean core. So there's also the first thing is to reflect how much I have done already and what can I do on top of what I've done as an organization. And really the last one, the 4th bullet point, is basically because you asked about, I think, the time when to do it. I must think if you think it from a theoretical point of view, and sometimes reality is a little bit different than that at university, you would look at your target state and your uncleanness in order to determine what is the right transition approach. Because if you don't like, oh my God, I look at the time, it is 20 something, and I need to now be on S/4HANA because otherwise I'm late and I might be a risk for whatever reason, right? I just take a conversion and take everything. But if I would really argue for myself and organization what is needed for me, you would make the clean core and the adherence to clean core, so the number of deviations, the number of processes that you could run as an organization in standard, you would take this as a very important decision criteria or factor for your transformation. And again, there, sometimes customers have the willingness. They say, I'd rather take another 1 or 2 years and do it right and make then a bigger change, because I know if I do a conversion, I'm never going to change because the argument's out of my hands. But there are situations where we have to acknowledge there's just so much other thing happening in the organization, and it's taking the approach and for example, does the conversation, doesn't really think prior to the transition about clean core. So a long answer, I would say, try to sum it up. There is no answer in the answer. The answer is it depends on the customer situation. And maybe Lukas, you want to add something from your side, from your.
Yeah. And I think that's also one point. I think there is no easy way to say, like, I'm doing clean core or I'm not doing it. You mentioned as, I think, point number 3 on the list, if I remember correctly. And it's nothing completely new. I think we should be a bit careful if you have a system, and I had that once with hundreds of thousands of custom code objects, looking at the extensibility perspective. It's not useful to say, hey, we want to have a goal that in 12 months from now, everything is now clean. But if you look at the long run, introducing the tools to understand why do we deviate from standard will help you, because even in your situation, you mentioned like, hey, as an investor, why should my portfolio companies use then a clean core ERP? Basically to answer your questions. And you will maybe ask questions like, hey, why do we deviate? Why do we have 500,000 custom code objects? If you have a clear justification for each and every one, you'll be a lot more happy. And I think that's an important point to say like, hey, there is some genuine value in there, yes, but I think there is no alternative to say, okay, we just do everything in chaos. Not meaning with anyone is doing something in chaos, you know, I want to be a bit careful or cautious there, of course, but I think that's also a fair point.
And I see one more question from Paul, why we don't just stay on premise. I mean, let me say from the clean core angle, that's fine. Clean core is something that basically is 3 stages of a life of a customer. Yeah. Let me say before, during, and after the transition, and then leave it up to your imagination when those 3 stages happen. Yeah, in your particular context. But what I want to say, it's nothing that is only related to a transition. Yeah, might have come around like that. All of these principles and all of that, and I think I said it, would have applied 10 or 15 years ago, and they make life easier. And then I would say, you have to choose your battles as an organization. How hard do I need to fight on those, let me say, principles and implementing this governance and these rules? Not doing anything in all of these dimensions, in all of these aspects, I think as a rule of thumb in life, is not a good idea. As I said, not always you have to be 5. You don't have to have a perfect enterprise architecture with a lot of factories and attributes and everything is in a talk and workflow organized. Probably not every customer needs that, or every organization needs that because of the size and complexity. But to have nothing in place when it comes to all of these facets that we're going to basically illustrate with the practices in this governance maturity framework is likewise, I don't think, a good idea.
All right, let's see if we can unmute Maurizio once again. Second chance. Maurizio, we are trying to unmute you, or try to unmute yourself. Now, can you speak up? We can't hear you. But I think there was one more question in the chat from Arun. Is there any agentic tool to review the clean core process?
We're not sure if I would call this agentic. When it comes to understanding the pros and the process execution, that from our point of view falls into the SAP scenario, let me say, part of our integrated tool chain, where we have, if I just plainly name the tools, we have Process Insights, Process Intelligence, and what's called Plug and Gain, where you can get a visibility on how processes are being executed. So the classic example that I've seen at many customers for a reason was payment terms, for example, that you understand what are the payment terms, how often they've been used, when was the last usage date. For that, for example, Process Insight is our tool of choice to understand that, because we have process execution flows in which you can see how standard SAP standard processes with the core of the system are being executed, like, for example, sending an invoice and how many variants, and where you basically can detect the uncleanness. And we define this as uncleanness is you have a huge number of configuration of variants where you hardly ever use them, and where you basically could say, I could get rid of them so that I have less test cases, I have less complexity, I have not someone choosing the wrong, in my case, payment term that ends up in a dead-end street because it's actually not being there. So with Signavio, there are pointers that help you to understand how clean your process is when it comes to the configuration side of the house.
All right. I can't see more questions in the chat, also not in Q&A tool. Now is definitely the last chance for you to post your question. And let me announce the upcoming session that will be held on November 3.
I can share my screen.
Coming session is so. There is a link to the session on November 3. Please note that this session will be conducted on Monday and not on Tuesday, as usual, because the week of November 3 is a week of TechEd, and our experts will be fully involved in the activity there, so they're not available, but at least on November 3. So we almost at the end of this session. Again, I can't see questions not in the chat, also not in Q&A tool. Thank you, Lukas. Thank you, Michael, for giving these insights and also guidance on how to handle these clean core principles. Excellent presentation. I've posted all the relevant links in the chat. For you, Michael, maybe include the link to Clean Core white paper in your PDF so we can share it with the audience. And thank you very much to our audience for being with us, for being so active, also bringing up sometimes not easy questions or not the question that could be easily answered, but great. We prefer such questions to keep the conversation going. And with this, thank you very much. Enjoy your day, evening, and we'll see each other on this topic on November 3. And for those who are part of our Move to Cloud ERP webcast, there will be another session taking place next week on October 28th, and we will talk about end of maintenance, what every customer should do and know about it. So also very important and relevant topic. If you're available, please tune in our session. Again, thank you very much and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.